Once you have the front disc brake kit installed, you need to safely and effectively get fluid to those new calipers. Let's install this dual reservoir master cylinder kit from KAISER WILLYS. Once you open the box, you'll see the instructions, the dual reservoir master cylinder, adjustable rod, all the brackets, fittings, washers, and hardware you'll need, as well as a proportioning valve with an integrated brake light switch. This is a stock single reservoir master cylinder on a Willys Jeep. So there's only one reservoir for the fluid and one line coming out, so all the pressure goes and is divided to all four wheels. With the dual reservoir master cylinder, you'll have two reservoirs, one for the front and one for the rear, as well as two lines coming out, one going to the front and one to the back brakes. So you're going to start by removing basically your entire factory brake system. Disconnect these lines, take off the support bracket, and remove the master cylinder from the frame. Once you remove all your factory brake components, it's going to look about like this. If you have a CJ2A, some of the webbing and supports look a little bit different. You'll want to get all your wires out of the way and bend your factory brake lines out of the way, because we're going to have to remove this stock master cylinder mount to allow room for the larger dual reservoir master. I installed the master cylinder onto the bracket just loosely with 2 bolts and the clutch prop rod or brace as well. They're just loose so it will slide, and set it in place so you have an idea where it's going to sit. That will show you how much of this you need to remove. Everyone I've seen online cuts the whole thing out. I'm going to mark it and remove as little as possible. You just need this bracket to sit tight against the frame and not contact anything over here. So as long as it's flat, you don't need to cut out any more of your frame than is absolutely necessary. I made my mark and removed the master cylinder. It's kind of hard to see, but right here is where it makes contact. So if I come down about 1/4 of an inch, cut this out up here and then across the top. You can use whatever method is best for you, a little die grinder, plasma cutter, anything you want. Just this is only about it's less than 1/8 of an inch thick. It's not very heavy. So we'll cut this piece out. I cut a line across the bottom and then just notched about 1 inch up here, and then it's already cut away for when the factory bend was in place. Then I just scored the little spot welds across the top, and it looks like it's gonna just kind of pop out of here. So once you score those welds, if you bend it a few times, so it comes right out. So now I can clean this up, clean that up, and then if I ever want to go back to the stock setup, it's just a matter of a few welds, hit it with the flap disc, and it'll look completely original. Versus cutting this whole thing out. You could still do that, but I think it's going to be easier for me to weld that back in. Or I'm going to love this so much I'll never go back to original again. But that's just the way I did it. Your mileage may vary. So now that this is cut out, I'll smooth this off a little bit and test fit our master cylinder in place. Here's the final example of what I had to remove. So I removed that rectangular piece, and my tub, one of the hat channels protrudes beyond the edge of the frame a little bit, so I had to sand that down and get as close to the steering box as you can without touching it. The nut and washer are fine from what I can see, but I did have to get real close to the edge of the steering box. Here's what it looks like all mocked up. Now I have to mark it to drill. So there's 4 holes on the side of the frame. If you notice, I have marks down on the bottom. So we'll transfer those over to the outside of the frame. Sorry, I have to hold this up here while I'm talking. And we're going to drill from the outside inward. So that's going to there's no way with the stock engine that you can get a drill between the bell housing and the frame. So you just need to mark where the front edge of your bracket goes, and then we'll transfer the holes onto the other side. With a 1/8 inch drill bit and get the pilot started. Now I'm going to come here from the outside where I have a lot more room to work, and we'll drill this out to fit the 3/8 bolt. I have all 4 holes drilled. They're 3/8 bolt, and you want them to fit a little bit loose, but not too loose, so that you have room to adjust the bracket and get all 4 bolts in. I have all the holes drilled. The master cylinder is bolted in snugly. This is kind of my test fit. The clutch rod brace is on, so this slides a little bit. You want to get it adjusted so it's not dragging, so that when you release the clutch it returns to where it should be. The most critical thing I've seen from the other documented installs of this kit are that you get full travel of the brake pedal, so that when you let off it returns all the way so your brakes don't drag, and when you push down it travels all the way to apply equal pressure to both chambers. One thing I noticed, if you use the original holes that come on this bracket, the master cylinder is out too far this way, so it doesn't line up with this pin, and when you depress the brake it hits the master cylinder lid and the corner of this bracket, and you only get about 2/3 of your pedal travel. So I'll show you when we're out on the bench here in a minute, but I trimmed the top corner of this bracket. It's not a structural thing, it's just I rounded the edge a little bit more so it doesn't hit. I also elongated these holes, and I'll show you that as well, to slide the master cylinder. We're only talking about 1/8 of an inch, and that allows the pedal to go all the way down, so when my pedal stops it's actually hitting the tub on the inside. The way it was out of the box, it was hitting the lid and this bracket first, and I don't know if you can see it, I have a white mark. That's where it was hitting from the factory, so it would stop right there. After trimming those spots I gained over 1 inch of travel up there, because you're going to need about 1.5 inches of travel on the clutch push rod. So I know that's a little confusing, but I'm just trying to give you tips from what I've read and what I'm seeing as I install this. And also you can see just how little it actually goes into that bracket. That's why I'm happy with my trim job. I didn't have to cut all this out, I just notched that little area. And make sure when it's tight that your bracket is hitting the frame and it's not contacting anything up near the steering box. This kit comes with a sort of universal push rod, so it only threads into about there. It has some adjustment, but it's far too long in stock form. So what I recommend doing is running the nut all the way up here. We're going to put this in place, mark it, cut it, and then by having the nut up here, when we run the nut off, it will clean the threads out. If you don't have a die on hand, that'll help you get it started back into this other piece. So I'm going to take it underneath and we'll put it in place, and I'll show you how I'm going to mark that. First thing you're going to want to do before you mark and cut your rod is ensure that the pedal is all the way up. So if you have new springs like I do, make sure they're pushed as far up as they can be, because you want to get the maximum amount of travel out of your pedal. So then I would put the eyelet on the pin on the brake lever, and the other piece push it all the way into the master cylinder, and that will show you at rest what your length needs to be. And you don't want to cut it so that it's completely tight. You're going to want to cut it a little short so that you have some adjustment, because while we need to get full travel, we also need it to not be putting any pressure on the piston while we're not using the brakes. Once you get it where you want and you know you have the proper amount of adjustment, just mark it with whatever you can, like that. Then we'll pull it out and cut it. I would err on the side of being too long, because if you don't have enough adjustment, you can always pull it back out and trim a little bit off. You cannot go the other way. So Leave it a little bit long and trim as needed. My part is marked. I'm going to throw it in the vise and trim it off with a cutoff wheel. So here's our trimmed piece. I took a flap disc and rounded it off, and now since we left the nut on there, it comes off. It's just finger tight and should go right back on. And our other piece will thread together. Once it's all done and we know it's correct, I would recommend anti-seizing this when you tighten the lock nut down. That way when you have to make future adjustments, it's not an ordeal. So now I'm going to make this as short as it'll go, put it inside the vehicle, and then lengthen it out until I have the correct pedal free play. Everything's bolted in. We did a couple test runs and we have full travel. Everything seems good. So I'm going to pull it out. We're going to bench bleed the master, probably paint this bracket and deburr our holes and just kind of get it all buttoned up and ready for reassembly. Then the last step under here will be to hook up our lines, and then we'll start bleeding everything. A couple of things that I ran into that may be an issue for you as well are the pedal would contact this bracket and the top of the cap as it came down. We can't cut any off of this, but we can trim this back. So I took about 1/8 of an inch just with a flap wheel and just kind of eased this corner until it didn't hit anything. I also elongated these holes so I could slide the master cylinder. You can see how it's not centered in that hole. As I got it farther that way, I was able to clear the lid. And so from what I've read, that's the biggest problem is stuff hitting here and not giving you full pedal travel. So by moving to the left about 1/8 of an inch, I was able to clear that pedal on the corner of this bracket and on the cap. You do have to be careful you don't go so far that the alignment of the piston and the pedal become at too much of an angle. It's a round ball, so it has a little bit of forgiveness, but you can't go too steep on your angles. It's totally up to you. Most people recommend bench bleeding anytime you have a new master cylinder, just because it's so much easier to work with up here in the vise rather than underneath the vehicle, especially on a Willys where the master cylinder's under the floor. If you're fancy, you can make up little 5/16 pieces of brake line that pump right back into here. I don't have any 5/16 with me, so we're just going to put a little bit in here. The idea is just don't let it run out of fluid. Don't let it run dry. So as you're pumping it out, make sure you're keeping it refilled up in the reservoir. So just take anything you have and you're just going to push. You'll see air bubbles come out. I'm not pushing like real hard or fast, just a little bit just to work the air bubbles out. And then once we start getting fluid out here, then we'll do some more full strokes, and I'll try to catch it in here since I don't have brake lines. But it's not rocket science. You're just working this. I don't know if you can hear the air bubbles coming out, and eventually it'll fill the whole chamber with fluid, and then we can install it and not have to do all that pumping while it's in the vehicle. Everything is bled and primed up and ready to install. I did wipe a tiny bit of red chapstick on these bolts because I definitely don't want them coming loose while you're driving. There is a lock nut, but that's just a personal preference. So now it's ready to install on the frame. All that's left now is to hook up the brake lines. So I have little fittings in here. I'll show you them in a second. And the larger reservoir is in the back. That's for the front, and the smaller reservoir on the front of the master cylinder is for the rear brakes. So the brake lines are flip-flop. So we got to hook this one up front and this one in the rear, so they're kind of cross each other here, which is strange, but that's just the layout of the master cylinder. If your Jeep still has the stock L134 in it, the bell housing is right here, so you're not able to bend a normal brake line and come straight into the master cylinder. So that's where these little doodads come in handy. They'll go like this, and you can point them down or at an angle, and that'll allow you to easily get an open end wrench up here on that bolt and connect it to the master cylinder. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and I'll show you what it looks like. Here is the final product with the 90-degree banjo fittings installed. So you can see they come straight down. You can easily slip your wrench between the bell housing and the master cylinder. The larger reservoir is in the rear, so this is my front brake line. I was able to use the existing 3/16 line. I just bent it a little bit to go into this fitting, and the same way with the rear one. So if you're running this setup, your stock lines will work with just a little bit of bending. This view shows you approximately where it sits, and everything's plumbed in and ready to go. This is my stock front brake line, comes right up to the original flex hose. If you do the disc brake swap and the dual reservoir master cylinder, it comes with this very nice little proportioning valve. It's manually adjustable, and it has an integrated brake switch, so you can tie this right into your factory Willys brake switch. It comes with all the fittings that you need, and everything is labeled front, rear, in and out. What this does is it allows you to manually adjust the pressure to the front and to the rear. So your drum brakes are going to perform differently than the discs, so it's good to have this to dial in your braking pressure to each axle. The Jeep we're working on today has 4-wheel disc brakes, so I'm not going to run the proportioning valve. I've found from my personal experience that just having equal pressure to all 4 wheels results in a nice, safe, and controlled straight stop. So that's a personal decision. Do some testing of your own if you're running 4-wheel disc. The proportioning valve doesn't hurt anything. You can adjust it so it's equal, but I found for simplicity's sake with 4-wheel disc that personally I just run it without a valve. One thing to keep in mind when you install the new master cylinder kit, your pressure switch for the rear brake lights will no longer work because it's no longer there. So keep that in mind. Have a plan for that. If you run the proportioning valve that comes with the kit, it has an integrated brake light switch with a nice little plug. You would simply wire this in to your factory wires on your old master cylinder, and your rear brake lights would work. If you're like me and you have 4-wheel disc and you're not going to use the proportioning valve, I'm going to put in a mechanically actuated switch. So that's just one option, but just keep that in mind and have a plan for that before you order all your parts and get started. But if you have drum in the rear, I would definitely install that proportioning valve. Do some test drives on some gravel and see which axle stops first, and just manually adjust that so that it feels safe and stops in a controlled way. This install is done. My wife came out and helped me bleed the system. It went great. We have a nice firm pedal, got a little bit of air out, and I think it's good to go. I will update you once I drive it a little bit, but I wanted to talk about this install really quick. You're definitely going to cut stuff and you're going to drill stuff. You shouldn't have to weld or do anything like that, but like I said, this video isn't step 1, do this, step 2, do that, because it's going to be different. Each vehicle is a little different. The way my tub sat on there, I had to cut something that you might not, and where your cross member is mounted, you might have to cut something I did not. So go into this project knowing there's a little bit involved. It says here, consult a brake professional to check your work. These are your brakes. These are important. Make sure it's done properly, and test it in some place that's safe away from traffic, and check for leaks. Make sure everything works well. But I think if you follow those tips, like moving that master cylinder over a little bit so you clear the pedal on the lid, and adjusting that rod so you get full travel and bleeding the air properly, it's going to work great for you. So please ask me questions in these comments, or reach out to me on any of my other platforms, and I'll gladly talk you through this. Get this part from Kaiser Willys. The link is in the description. Use my code at checkout, RedEyeGarage10, to save 10% on your order. And I hope you give it a shot and it works well for you. So stay tuned for performance test updates, and have a great day.